All right. Well, welcome everybody. Looks like we got an okay attendance today. We've got some folks in the audience here. I've asked my friend Doug Bryan to join us. Doug's background, he and I met at Amazon almost like 20 years ago, or actually 20 years ago, not almost anymore. And we worked together there for about a year. And then he came and joined me at my last startup, Rich Relevance, for, I want to say like 5 years. We worked together there. And he's just a great guy. He was a lecturer at Stanford and is deep on the interface between data, big data, and businesses. He's been a consultant. He's been in sales. He's been on the engineering side. And so he has got a great perspective. And he posted something about 3 weeks back, like right after we did one of the papers that we did. He posted a link to that paper, and that's, I think that the cost of training is going to become disruptive and go down. And we had literally just like finished our meetup where we said, gosh, the cost of training these models is like umpteen $1 million now. And I thought that contrast in perspective was so stark that I had to invite him and just help facilitate some of his thoughts and what he's seeing. He's at a firm right now, like where he just said he's an evangelist, so he touches lots of different clients. And so I think he's going to have a broad perspective to share with us and help facilitate a conversation. So with that, Mr. Doug Bryan.
All right, thanks. Let me see if I can find the share button. Let me know if you can see the slides.
Yeah, we're good.
Oh,
so
the calc.
So what I think is happening here, and the reason I've been writing about this so much lately, is during the tech bubble, I was at a research group in Accenture, and I worked with companies all over the world and helped manage Palo Alto, Chicago, and Paris research groups. And one of the big questions we were constantly asking is, what's the internet for? What are we going to do with it? Because we thought we could get something better than just, a big bookstore, which is what Sally and I went to a few years after that. But I think what's happening is what the internet was for. And the closest analogy is when desktop computing first came out. When desktop computing first came out in the late 70s, Wall Street literally bought truckloads of Apple II computers and VisiCalc, and at like $5,500 a seat, and gave it to people. And one of the managers finally got pissed and said, what the hell are we buying these grade school computers for all these analysts for? What are they going to do with it? And the manager said, I have no idea. And that was the point. The point is that when you put that much power in someone's hand, the innovation is going to happen. And the average ROI, the average break-even ROI was seven work days. And I think that's what's going to happen with large language models, specifically pre-trained large language models. Is we made big advances in machine learning, most recently XGBoost, and then deep learning, but those are still really hard to tune. And data preparation, of course, with XGBoost is an art in and of itself. And then, but the pre-trained models, especially the chat overlays, are just super easy to use. So what we're seeing already, and it's only been 5 months. That's the hard thing to remember about this. It's only been 5 months. I mean, ChatGPT 3 is what blew the doors off everything, and that was November. So what we think is going to happen is these things are so easy to use. They're going to be like spreadsheets. Every part of the company is going to start using them, and that's going to lead to immense innovation. And just to give other examples and other technologies of where something like this has happened, is in logistics. 40 years ago, a company called Schneider National went out and bought a bunch of super mini computers and was the first one to do traveling salesmen, and they came to dominate their industry pretty quickly. Well, now 40 years later, we have customers that are building predictive models to decide for an individual shipment, whether it should be shipped by sea or by air, based on what the inventory is in the container, and by the market conditions, and how hard the winter's been. If you're buying winter coats from China, and it's been a warm winter, then you better get the coats here really fast, otherwise you're not going to sell any of them. So I mean, something like that used to need a whole bunch of professional data scientists, but now with XGBoost, just an analyst in a retail company can build that model themselves and set up an endpoint and make the endpoint available to everybody in the company to call from Excel. So a lot less valuable than less traveling salesmen for thousands of trucks, but something that almost any advanced analyst can do. And then for consumer credit, 20 years ago, probably one of the first really big successes with neural nets, HNC Falcon, was about a 500 parameter neural net for real-time prediction of credit card fraud, and sold for like a $1.5 billion almost instantly as soon as it proved its capability. And nowadays we have customers that they don't know Python, they don't know R, they're building fraud models themselves for B2B applications and saving $20 million a year. So again, a lot less money than 1.4 billion, but individual analyst teams for mid-sized companies are doing this now. And we think that's what's going to happen with large language models almost instantly. We're seeing it over and over and over right now. I mean, there's going to be massive use cases for these models. Internet search and lawyer assistance. There's a couple law firms I consult with that are putting tens of millions of dollars into large language models, basically to practice verbal argument in court, like a dry run for a lawyer who's going to be arguing in court tomorrow. And coding assistants, some estimate that the coding assistants already are generating $15 billion in value a year. And then a lot of the pharmaceutical companies are using the same technology to design new proteins, or to identify new proteins. So those are the big head terms, and those are going to be worth hundreds of billions. But there's going to be thousands of these little things, like people have been using spreadsheets for the last 40 years. And I'll just take you through some of these that our customers are building right now. And the way they're building them mainly is by either reusing a large language model or fine-tuning it. As Sally alluded to, training one of these, training a 500 million or 500 billion large language model from scratch is an expensive endeavor. It's going to come down pretty sharply, but it's going to be still going to be crazy expensive. But using one that is already trained, a lot of our customers right now are building apps by just calling the ChatGPT API. And then more and more of them, for example, are just going to Hugging Face and downloading one of the pre-trained ones and then using that. And then the next level of sophistication, which is still very, very low cost in the single digit or double digit thousands, is to take one of the pre-trained models, download it, and fine tune it on your own corpus. Morgan Stanley, one of our big customers, is doing this with 100,000 of their own financial advising documents. And then the third case, which or the last case, is where you train it from scratch, and this is what Bloomberg did. But they reused all the architecture and all the code from the Bloom large language model. So they didn't need to have tons of deep learning experts to do it. They were able to reuse all the code from the open source model Bloom, and then just fed it their own corpus. So, I mean, there's all these levels of reuse that we think is going to drive down the cost really, really fast. One example of just using a pre-trained model straight off, one of our customers is using it for using it to look for insider trading emails. They have tens of thousands of emails, and the scoring gets kind of expensive, but they were able to build an application, in a week, and set up the quality monitoring, and set up the statistics, and set up everything they needed to monitor this thing, and feed it emails, and the testing indicates that it's better than humans on identifying what might or might not be an insider trading issue. Another example, and this is the case we see most common, is putting examples in the prompt. So few shot training, but putting the examples in the prompt rather than tuning the model. And one of our customers did this on his own. He's not really a data scientist, just an innovative guy that got all excited about large language models. And he had to write, I don't know, 3 or 4 dozen employee reviews. They have a 360 review process at his company, so you review far more than your direct reports. And not his favorite thing to do, so he created an API that called ChatGPT, and now he's experimenting with an open source version of the chatbot from Hugging Face called Hugging Chat, where he just fills out a spreadsheet, and then the spreadsheet generates the prompt, and the prompt gets sent off, and it loads up the spreadsheet, and boom. Once he sets up the spreadsheet and sets up the API, 5 seconds per review, 500 words per review, and let it run over lunch, and he's done with all of his reviews. And
Doug, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when we're looking at this, we have Susan Smith, and you've got your those C through G columns, I guess it is.
Yep.
Those are like rankings. Is that what we're looking at there, or something like that?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And these are like, like if you go to ChatGPT and say, I'll write an email, give me a bullet list of what you want it to talk about. And when he writes the prompt, it's just going off of these things. Like a 3 is, okay, then a bullet list is high productivity, and a 1 is, doesn't play well with others.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of get where you're going with that. I just wanted, that's what I thought it was, and I just want to make sure I was reading that correctly. Thank you.
And the cool thing about this is he said, when I mean, it's like a silly little example, but he had so much fun with it. But when he's reviewing peers and below, you have different columns. And when you're reviewing people up in a 360 review, he had different columns. So it was super easy to change the spreadsheet, or to have a different tab that just generated the prompts. I mean, that's the whole point, is these prompts are just text, so you can generate a new prompt super fast. And there's a lot of companies working on little aids like this, little aids that can save thousands of hours. Another example that we're working with one of the biggest consulting companies in the world for their internal finance team. These big consulting companies are just so complex now. The 500,000 employees, operating in 120 countries and almost every currency. And their problem was coding deals. So they wanted to be able to tell which lines of service. Basically, it's master product management, where being able to tell what kind of service you were selling, or what service line you were selling, and being able to roll that up across 120 countries and decent data about it, because the salespeople don't go in there and code it right all the time, or very much at all. So what they were doing is checking the product codes for these deals and predicting the product code based on the contract, based on all the text in Salesforce, the whole history of the relationship with that customer. So a lot of information that you can get about what was being sold, and then coding it into 120 categories about what exactly are we selling to this company. And they just needed that for their internal product management. You know, how much did we sell for cloud migration, and how much did we sell in human resource or human capital optimization? And in this whole company with over 500,000 employees, there's probably only going to be 30 people using this model. But it was so cheap to implement by fine-tuning one of the open source models that it's worth it just to increase the quality of their back office data. And it's also a huge advantage that, you know, you don't have to mess with language translation, because a lot of the large language models already know a bunch of languages.
Hey, Doug, quick
Yeah.
question. So in these examples, you're referencing open source models. Do you have insights into kind of what models, what scale they are, and what models they're using? And in particular, how those, I'm curious how those are positioning or contrasting themselves against the, you know, the latest, greatest GPT-4 style pay for use models.
None of these are as good as GPT-4, that's for sure.
But it doesn't matter. They're not, they have the option to use the GPT-4. You're making the case that
Yep.
it's high value add, so it's, you know, they could afford it.
Right.
But they're choosing the open source.
Yeah. Bloom, one of these was Bloom. Another one was GPT-J. But yeah, what we're seeing, and it was like this in the early days of AutoML as well. We're really not competing against what an expert could do on GPT-4. You're competing against no model, right? And so I forgot how big GPT-J is, but it's not very big. But we've had big success with pre-trained models with 6 billion and 6 billion parameters, and then scoring gets really reasonable, right? I mean, scoring can get expensive as hell when you start doing few shot in the prompts, right? The prompts get big, and that can get prohibitively expensive. So yeah, 5 billion, 6 billion in the model, and then few shot, and then you can use these for anything. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's cool.
Because you're really competing against nothing. I mean, that's the interesting part of this, is the long tail. We're competing with Excel. I mean, we're competing with people trying to do this in Excel or manually, you know, going through Salesforce data and trying to check stuff. And it's so the bar is low, I guess, is the point.
So are they choosing? Can I just finish, Dave? So they're choosing the smaller open source model. Is that because of cost or privacy or flexibility?
Right now, just to get version 1 up. When they get version 2 up, you know, they'll try Bloom, which I think is 175 billion. But you know, it's like anything in machine learning. You know, try XGBoost or try Lasso with a low learning rate, and if you get an AUC above 7.7, hell, field it. Let's go. So they'll iterate, but we have seen examples, especially in this example, where the contracts were big, like a 50-page contract in PDF, and you got to send that up in the. If you're doing those in prompts, it can get expensive to score, and or expensive to infer, and it can get slow to infer, right? If you want to do 20,000 of these at night, and you know you don't have a big AWS account, yeah, it gets expensive or slow.
So Doug,
Yeah.
Back to that AWS point, are these guys running them then like on a desktop level, a big desktop, maybe with a GPU or two in it or something like that machine, or are they actually farming it somewhere and out to the cloud?
Yeah, it's, most of these are going to the cloud. Our product is a workbench for non-programmers,
Oh,
and
okay.
once it's installed, we're hitting the GPU farms in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or increasingly Databricks. Databricks is one of our new partners, and Databricks is making a big push into GPU farms.
Okay. Thanks.
Doug, I had a follow-up question, basically two follow-up questions. So one was, I presume that for now, many of these implementations seem to be the long tail that you showed. So small help here and small help there. So as such, they do not, I mean, they still affect the jobs in these companies. Like someone out there is collecting all this data and collating and then figuring out the allocation and attribution for different departments and countries and translations and whatnot, right? So even though there are 30 users, but I'm assuming there are like hundreds of people behind the scenes helping out collect and put all this together, which is now possibly automatically being done. Is that right? I mean, are the connectors also being built automatically through some, look at the API and then build this connector and get the data? In which case, I mean, it's a far-fetched, it's a very deep impact on the jobs that these 500K consulting firms are hiring. I mean, this is the low jobs, low-level jobs, if you may. I mean, low level as in like, collecting data entry, putting it together. So do you think that is what is getting affected for now, the long tail?
Well, there's a lot of platforms like our platform and like DataSphere from SAP. To collect the data is almost no effort whatsoever because it's all in Salesforce. You basically just have to make a query to Salesforce and then walk the results and pull out all the PDFs and pull out all the texts and send it over. So the data preparation for the fine tuning is really minor. That's gotten a lot easier because the data is not disparate. The data is all in Salesforce, and the team that built this one at the consulting company, I mean, like I said, this model was competing with Excel, people trying to do this by reading a bunch of stuff and then pulling things down in Excel and browsing it. But that team had 100 SAP or 100 Salesforce programmers. So if they did have a question like, how do I do a query to get the PDFs and just move the PDFs over to S3 somewhere, they had plenty of people that could do that. So the data preparation was pretty minor. On all of these, the data preparation is not a bottleneck.
Got it. And the second question around the SLAs, I mean, given that these are long tail jobs and mostly, coming from Excel to this world, you can wait a little extra, even if the scoring takes 10 extra seconds, let's say, right? So it may cost whatever it costs on ChatGPT, but slightly longer than, let's say, what we're used to with internet search or automated programs. Do you see the SLA for more high impact use cases a concern at this point in time with the LLMs?
No, not at all. I mean, just looking at the photographs on the video, there's people on the call that remember Hadoop and remember things before Hadoop. I mean, we used to joke that there's only 3 speeds in data science: interactive, lunch, and overnight. And for most of these, overnight's fine. There's really no urgency. Now, if you're doing a coding assistant or something like that, yeah, that'd really suck if your coding assistant was overnight. You wake up in the morning and go, hey, I got these 800 things you did wrong yesterday. Just thought you'd want to know. But yeah, most of these, I mean, run it in the background like a spreadsheet, right? You just run it in the background and you look at it in the afternoon. It's all running. Most of these are running on GPUs. Most of these are running on either AWS or Databricks, which is big GPU farms. But yeah, if it has to be interactive, then it makes a big difference.
Have you seen hallucinations?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, of course, yeah. But I mean, have you ever seen an XGBoost model with 0.1 AUC? I mean, there's errors and everything. And whenever you test against humans, I mean, a lot of these were better than the humans, right? I mean, there's a study came out of I forgot where it was, but it was last week on medical advice. There were two studies, one for medical advice using ChatGPT for medical advice for questions physicians asked, and ChatGPT beat the humans only 44% of the time. But then they went to Reddit, which is where normal people ask questions, and for questions from Reddit that patients would ask, right? It's always, what's the bias of your training set? What's the bias of your scoring set? What's the bias of your test set? Questions physicians ask, ChatGPT doesn't do good. Questions that people ask, ChatGPT 4 won 80% of the time. So yeah, there's definitely hallucinations, but any process has that. Every business process has that. You're never going to get an AUC of 0.1. And then these I already talked about. Morgan Stanley, 15,000 agents around the world with varying skill levels. The cool thing about this is there's a log curve on skill levels of the advisors. So the very best financial advisors, these models aren't going to help because they're very, very good at it. It's like the very best programmers, right? Very best programmers probably don't use very fancy IDEs, and they're fine. But it's everybody below the 60th percentile. These chatbots really improve their quality. And then Bloomberg, this is the other thing we're seeing, is proprietary corpus. There's immense value in Bloomberg's corpus. They have a highly curated data set that they've been collecting and publishing as a product for 40 years. I mean, their data is better than S&P. It's better than anybody's. So they trained a Bloom-based model from scratch because their corpus was better than everyone else's. And I think we'll see that a lot too. If you have a really good corpus, then you can have a strategic advantage. I think that's it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's all about the long tail.
Yeah,
It's all about the long tail. We call it the moonshot and the mundane, and we make our money on the mundane.
cool. So, Doug, how many? You mentioned a few of these, but I'm sure you must have other clients that are using this. I mean, are most of your clients, how excited are they about ChatGPT, would you say?
There's two camps. There's the camp that's really excited, and not the CTO and not the CIO, but the CEO walked into the head of data science's office sometime this winter and said, let's start 3 projects. And that's most of them. I mean, I'm one of the biggest brokerage companies in the world. I'm spending most of next week with. They probably have 40 projects going. But then there's other ones that, I mean, if you just go to Reddit or just read CNBC, or there's some people that are really afraid of it. There was a client that I was at this week who has blocked it on their firewall. They're really afraid of it.
Wow.
So if you're in the office, well, actually, everything's on VPN now because nobody's in the office. So you can't go to ChatGPT, and if you do, it logs it basically, and so they're really afraid of it because there was people haven't realized these are multi-tenant applications. So Samsung like asked ChatGPT 10,000 hard questions and leaked a lot of data basically.
Oh.
They were doing few shot prompts and they basically uploaded a lot of sensitive data to ChatGPT-4. And for a multi-tenant product, that's not good. But most companies, way more than half, 75%, are super excited about this. They see it as a discontinuity and not sure where it's going, and that's part of the excitement.
Okay.
Doug, I had one more question about the the large big models from OpenAI, and apparently Google models are smaller than OpenAI, but still large, versus these smaller models, which can help with agile fine-tuning and adapt faster, maybe even if you have SLAs to meet, have more control over it and so on and so forth. How do you see the returns on, and I mean, that's more of a investment question, like on OpenAI's 10 billion from Microsoft versus some of these open source. And then the reason I bring up 2 points in contrast. So like when you mentioned those 40 years old, 20 years old examples, the adoption rate back then was slower than what it is now of the newer technologies. So what is your thought on that?
Well, because of Google Docs and Office, there's 2 companies that can get, 100 million users in a day, right? If they add a button to Google Slides, I'll start using it tomorrow. I mean, it's and give me a 6-month free trial, and then how shareware works or how premium works. I don't know what valuation Microsoft got, but Microsoft's always been pissed about their market share for search. So it was worth 10 billion just to jerk the chain. But I think the clouds and the Office suites are going to be essentially sales channels. OpenAI doesn't have to worry about product development anymore. It just has to worry about the technology and the channel partners that go make 1,000 products out of it. I think in a year, Google and Microsoft. I think in a year we'll be saying 10 billion was a really good deal.
Aren't we already saying that now? If you look at the bump in Microsoft stock valuation, I think they've more than made back that 10 billion. 10 billion. That was a pretty cheap price.
Interesting question though is that paper that Dave brought up last time about the moat, the Google document internal, kind of what's the defense against these open source large language models, and what role are they going to play?
And if I may add, if I may add to that, that's a great point, Roger. So if I may add to that, in terms of OpenAI models are big to iterate as well. So what interest does Microsoft have in the long run to continue to use those big models? I mean, of course, OpenAI may itself come out with smaller models that it can iterate faster and improve, but in the long run, that's a huge cost for them, running it on a huge farm, 540 billion, and slow to iterate as well. Then wouldn't it, for their own investment point of view, help be better for them to actually maybe switch when the smaller models are most performing at same level, but also more cost effective?
Yeah, and at some point, OpenAI and NVIDIA. I mean, we spent a lot of time with NVIDIA. They're not going to sit around and just sell stuff to Google and Amazon, and they're gonna have their own cloud real soon. So yeah, there's no moat, and the good stuff's open source. So you just got to build a good product and go fast. It's like Amazon. They're not. They sold books. Jeez, what kind of moat is that? So, but it's going so fast, and I think what you'll see is just like with hyperparameter tuning, where we fine tune, we got good at it really quickly once we realized how complex it was, or we simplified it really quickly. I think you see that with these large language models. Like as soon as we get version 1 stable for a lot of these apps, then we'll set up a process to back test every few months against a smaller model, or against, instead of 12-shot prompts, let's try 8-shot prompts, right? Because when you use them at scale, the cost does add up, that's for sure. But that back testing, I mean, we know how to do that. That's not complex. And you could see applications where they're trained on 100 billion parameter model, and every few months, as it gets more users, it just goes down to the smaller models, and there's going to be a saddle curve there somewhere, and it just finds the nice trade-off. And you could backtest every few months forever.
Hey, Doug, can I ask kind of an off-the-wall question here? You're always hearing, at least I've seen a lot of articles that say that, prompt engineering is like the job type thing, being able to engineer these prompts. What do you think from your perspective on that?
There is, we're seeing people learn really, really fast about what's a bad prompt and what's a good prompt. Because when they hallucinate wildly. And you pick it up in the first pass at QA, basically. Like the guy who was doing the customer reviews, I mean, the Excel was generating the prompt. So when he found a bad way to write a prompt, he generated 800 of them in a second. But he was able to fix it in 3 minutes. Yeah, there's I mean, there was a piece on CNBC today where they were asking, they were using personas for famous economists and asking them whether we should continue raising the interest rate. And they asked 3 famous dead economists, and 2 of them, the answer was very clearly stated. The prompt was very clear, and the answers were perfect, just absolutely perfect. But then on the 3rd one, they changed the question pretty radically, and the answer was ridiculous. So yeah, prompt engineering is not that hard. I mean, it's like Z-scores 20 years ago or something, or throwing out outliers. I mean, hallucinations are usually not subtle from what we've seen. They're usually huge, and so they're easy to find.
So Doug, one of the things we've been looking at recently is something called parameter efficient fine tuning. Have your clients, when you mentioned fine tuning in your slides, I assume that was full model, full parameter set fine tuning. Is that correct? Or are people starting to use the adapters and low rank models?
Yeah, starting to use those, and and there's frameworks on Hugging Face for that. So
yeah,
you can go really. I mean, you just need a few Python guys, and it's amazing how many departments and big companies now have Python people, because anybody in quantitative undergrad or master's knows Python now. It's so I mean we have marketing teams that have 50 excellent Python programmers, and so yeah, they're trying all that stuff, and then just stepping down the models. There's like just even with GPTJ, I think there's 6 versions of it, and so you could stay right within the same family and just decrease the parameter size or decrease the size of the model. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like number of trees or depths in XGBoost or something like that. Just set up this matrix, this grid of models, and do the trade-off on size of the model versus size of the prompt, and then do the cost-benefit trade-off.
Hey, Doug, I have one question. So what are your views on like personalized models? Like all these large models, they are actually getting fine-tuned, and then the total size is reducing to less than like 4 GB in some cases, right? If that is the case and people can run on their own like mobiles and all, like how does this like affect people's day-to-day life, like with the personalized models?
But we haven't seen any of that yet. Almost everybody we work with is in the cloud, and so if it's going to be on a phone, like, you know, all of our customers have Salesforce apps on their phone, but Salesforce isn't on their phone, that's for sure. So everything will be remote, everything will be APIs. Yeah, our big customers have literally spent hundreds of millions of dollars the past 5 years migrating to the cloud, or in some cases, you know, $1 billion migrating to the cloud. And so trying to leverage that and get mileage out of it is a big thing. It's almost all enterprise software, so, you know, usability and B2C is not something we run into much.
Okay, got it.
Hey, Doug. I was wondering if I could ask in a slightly different direction. So your slides, you know, really talked about this phenomenon where companies, they can take advantage of that long tail and just create tons of value through these smaller use cases. I'm curious if any of your clients are talking to you about like truly disruptive things, you know, where they're either worried that someone is going to come along and actually like destroy their business, or that they're thinking, you know, they want to work with you to help figure out a way to, like, you know, eat somebody else's lunch completely.
Well, all the drug companies are applying this to both literature research, literature search. I mean, you think computer science has a lot of useless journals and blogs. Pharma is, I mean, just unbelievable amount of stuff. So the pharma companies are all working on chatbots for research literature, basically, and for their own products too. The big pharma companies, you know, 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 products make it to market. So, but you still have all the research and all the data about those other experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pharma companies are also working on applying large language models to proteins. There's some really cool stuff going on about, you know, give it all the data on the 300 million proteins we understand, and then ask it, well, if I wanted to cure small cell lung disease, what protein should I do? And these things are coming back right away and saying, here's 2 proteins you should try. This protein, this third protein, doesn't exist in nature, but you should try that one if you can figure out how to make it. But it's never been seen in nature, but we think this one will be. So they're doing stuff like that. But for normal disruption, the only one is the educational. There were services where you could, you know, it could proofread your essay, or tutors. I mean, those are getting wiped out in the stock market pretty quickly.
Thanks.
Hi, Doug. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. I want to know, kind of like, when you increase the chain, or you add more chains to your existing model, how will the change of accuracy? Does it like still retains the accuracy, or it becomes a little bit harder to train?
You mean when you fine tune one of the open source models?
Yeah, and like when you add more things to your chain to a model, kind of like kind of like you have already have like feature 1, feature 2 included in that, and you want to add a feature 3.
Yeah.
Like how to make.
Well, that's one of the reasons. One of the companies I work with, one of the reasons they liked, instead of starting with a big model like Bloom and working backwards to find the smaller model, they're doing forward search. I mean, it's analogous to forward and backward stepwise regression 20 years ago. Is they start with the small models and move forward because they want their fine-tuning corpus to have a big effect very, very quickly. And so they're, but yeah, I haven't seen great methodologies yet on how to pick the size of the fine-tuning corpus or the size of the base model. The companies I've worked with so far are just doing grid search on that and using a wide variety of models and corpuses, and then seeing how it works. The one thing we've been really shocked by is how few, when you're doing few shot through a prompt, how few examples you need. I mean, a lot of us have read that in the literature for years, but it's still shocking to see.
Like how many input data are you needed for one feature?
Right. Yeah. To improve the classification, where you give it you give it example cases, and it you know, with 5-10 examples, and you can do things that, you know, 3 years ago you needed 10,000 examples.
Cool.
Hey, Doug, following up on Ted's question on, you know, how the companies are looking at the impact on their businesses. A few weeks ago, there was a report or a study that OpenAI published along with Wharton on the impact on jobs and what specific kinds of jobs. And there they focused more on, you know, they classified the jobs as per the skills required and the knowledge and the reasoning required in their job, and the ones with knowledge were the highest impacted, and so on and so forth, you know, going down to the level where it's all using your hands and limbs, least impacted. And then Goldman report came out later about talking about 300 million jobs affected, and or some number like that. Do you, I mean, see that at the individual department levels as well? I mean, one is at the levels of the companies trying to protect their businesses and figuring out. I mean, yesterday when I saw the news about Wendy's going to chatbot-based drive-through, I mean, that's a not in knowledge workers. You know, that's the workers that relatively, you know, hourly pay workers or something like that getting affected by this. And what's your view on that overall? I mean, this is a very philosophical question also, but I mean, it's a real question at this time for many people out there.
Well, if you've been to a big airport recently and you went to McDonald's, there's no cashiers anymore. There's no cashiers at all. There's no order takers at all. It's a kiosk. And in most of the world, McDonald's used to be a big customer of mine. And when they went to ordering on the mobile app, they had to redesign their stores in Asia because people would drive up to the restaurant, come in the lobby, order on their phone, and then just stand around. So they essentially needed a waiting room. And no, we're not seeing any change in that. And to be honest, if you go back and read the McKinsey stuff from 10 years ago, or if you read the McKinsey stuff from 5 years ago, or you read the World Economic Forum stuff 10 years ago, everybody says 30% of the people are going to be out of work. And they say that every few years. And the CEO of IBM said that last week, and he said, I'm not hiring any back office people anymore because they're all going to be out of work for ChatGPT. And he was in the press for 3 days. So that stupid statement paid for itself because he was in the press for 3 days. It's not going to happen. there's controlled experiments coming out now on call centers. It's not replacing call center people, it's improving call center people. And you know, until the productivity improvements start being measured in, you know, 300, 400%, then you start losing jobs, but we're nowhere near that. It's just improving the quality of the existing people right now. But there are certain areas, like, you know, I'd hate to be a copywriter for a small website company where you can generate product descriptions for every product on the website in about 20 seconds. But yeah, there's very few. I mean, we haven't seen it yet, but that's why it's so exciting. There's going to be 10,000 use cases, and we've only seen like the first 5. We don't know.
I mean, it's the start of this whole LLM based, and LLM is just one mode right now. You know, once you put vision in there, once you put bigger context. I mean, just today, Anthropic announced that they will now support 100,000 tokens, which is a huge bump. And you can more or less give the, like, I think you mentioned 100K documents, and let's say, you know, whatever number of tokens it brings. Essentially, the point is that now this is just the start of it, and within 6 months, who knows what it will be.
Yeah,
and that's the bigger question.
The reports that came out from Amazon and Microsoft on the coding assistants, the coding assistants are generating about 15 billion in value, and they've been doing that for a while. So, you know, before the economic downturn, how many programmers was Amazon firing? None. How many programmers was Microsoft firing? None. So if you can double the productivity of your good programmers, most people say thank you very much, and they go hire anyway, because you're trying to upgrade everybody every year anyway. So no, we haven't seen it yet, but I mean, it might happen. I mean, we have seen examples. The cool stuff we're going to see examples where things like for inside sales and call centers and prospecting, it's just going to be built into like Exact Target and the email systems and the Salesforce and the call center systems. We've one of the coolest examples I've seen is financial service company sending out prospecting emails. And normally what you do is you'd have some human write 10 pieces of copy and then do some A/B testing, you know, blast and measure, and then do regression analysis. Say, okay, who's most likely to like version 1 versus version 9 versus. Well, what they're doing now is they're basically analyzing the customer's history and everything the customer ever said on Twitter and Facebook, and trying to estimate what tone they would like, and then they're sending the emails either in the tone of the Federal Reserve Bank, or in the tone of Reddit, or in the tone of Monty Python, or whatever the case might be. But basically an infinite number of copies can be tested now, and we've seen some big changes in conversion rate for that. But that's, I mean, that's not putting people out of work. That's just making email a better channel.
May I just add one question on the law firms? Sorry, Jerry, just finishing on that one. You said you mentioned with the law firms, did you see any impact there? That's a very specific question, of course.
Oh yeah. So the two biggest, so call centers was 14% increase in productivity, which is about 3 billion a year in the United States, and coding assistants about 15 billion a year in the United States. The ones the CEOs are excited about is brainstorming. We've used ChatGPT 4 in a lot of brainstorming scenarios, and it always does good. I mean, you wouldn't think so, but it just reads more than all of us. So it's been really impressive. And for the lawyers, it's always been good, because ChatGPT is a hell of a lot cheaper than a senior partner. So if you want to test, if you want to take a junior associate and have him test his speech in court or his analysis in court, and it's going to take 4 hours to do the dry run. Man, ChatGPT is a good deal. That's a really good deal. Yeah, the law firms are investing in this. I know a couple law firms that are going to probably invest $1 billion this year in chatbot assistance.
Yeah, Toby, did you want to unmute and speak up?
Yeah, I had a kind of different kind of question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Have you seen any kind of multi-turn applications, or are they all pretty much, you know, assemble some prompt, get some output? You know, thank you, that's great. Or do you see any more iterative?
Not very many, because this is so new. But like for the protein discovery stuff, it's definitely iterative. The scientists need to spend some time asking it, all right, why did you pick this protein that doesn't exist in nature? And the discussion goes on longer. And in the brainstorming, which I don't know what the value of the brainstorming is going to be, but the brainstorming is, every time we've used it, and we've used it, I don't know, 10 times since November, and it's always been super impressive. It's always a discussion, but it's only like a half-hour discussion.
Those sound like they're kind of human marshaled iterative processes.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is more of the agent style, not as wacky as AutoGPT, more constrained, but you know, that kind of thing.
No, and the pharmaceutical companies, there's a paper came out from CMU this week, or I mean, relatively recently, that talked about, right, the being able to completely automate, basically reinforcement learning with yourself. You know, like the AlphaZero chess and stuff like that. But no, the pharmaceutical companies are really afraid of that stuff. It's no, I haven't seen. Long story short, no, haven't seen very many of those. We're, especially my company. My company's big on low-hanging fruit, so we're going to get the low-hanging fruit. And
but sometimes it's useful just for things like, for instance, to cope with hallucinations. If in a second round you ask for references to support the material that's been generated, then often I'll get like a mea culpa and like, oh yeah, let me give you this other document instead.
We're seeing experimentation on that, basically a variation of in industry what's called the 5 whys. Is, you know, if you just run Shikard similarity on the golden answer, most of these processes have golden files where every day we ask these 100 questions and here's answers that we really trust, and you run cosine or Shikard similarity and say, okay, that's close enough, let's keep going. And on the ones you don't, you just ask why 4 times and then run Shikard again, and that actually eliminates a decent number of false positives. But we have more than one customer experimenting with like having Bloom QA ChatGPT-4. Now, there's an independence assumption in there, and if you look at the corpuses these things came from, there's not independence. So, yeah, one of the big financial companies we work with is actually studying correlation between the big models to what they do for
opportunities.
Well, basically, right? You don't want GPTJ.
Or does this one know that this one doesn't?
Or just QA, just you know, if you have 3 models and 2 of them give the same answer, then if they're highly correlated, it doesn't do anybody any good. So yeah, it's because you want once you start getting high volumes, QA has to be uncorrelated. There has to be some independence, and that's one of the reasons Bloomberg built their model is they totally trust their corpus, and I mean that's their business. They sell information, so yeah, we're just the beginning of this, man. It's if you had this meeting a year from now, it'd just be so totally different. It's just I've been doing this 40 years, and this is the fastest improvement I've ever seen in anything.
I just posted a link on chat. Wall Street Journal published an article today that there is more than $1 billion going into the well, billions are being invested into AI startups, and I'm sure, and no business plans required. It's like the internet days.
Well, what was that thing just this week with Replay AI? And they like stood on a table and said, who's willing to pay the most?
Character.ai, zero revenue, zero business model, 10 million users or something like that. And the most recent round of funding made them a unicorn, and they went back and renegotiated it so they would just be just below a unicorn. They said, we don't want to be a unicorn. We don't want that much visibility. $1 billion with zero revenue. So we've seen this movie before.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a horror show? Or is it something?
No, I think Sand Hill Road deserves every every collapse they get. But
Pets.com too, or something like that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Doug, how do you think of like big models for engineering? Like I attended a talk from TSMC, and they tell us that they usually kind of have hundreds of parameters for the process. Like any correlations like in this field?
Well, yeah, I haven't seen very many of those. Where some of the consulting companies are trying to look at large language models by industry, like building a large language model for mechanical engineering, where you they kind of boil down to specialized corpuses instead of just using the open web stuff. And the same, I mean, there's 2 or 3 really big corpuses out there, but I mean, I think you'll see those really specialized large language models pop up, but yeah, we haven't seen that yet. Typically with a technology, it takes 2 or 3 generations to get specialized by industry or by field. Medical, yeah, medical's going to be first. Someone's going to do an offshore doctor. You can't do one onshore because we have a monopoly on the medical union in this country. But someone's going to do an offshore medical advisor, there's been lots of studies done, and it'll be better than the doctors. The doctors have not been. Clinical physicians have been getting worse for a long time, so it'll be easy to beat them. And now, whether you charge $1 a question or, I mean, the business models still to be determined.
I think it will be great. Like, if I just have a small disease, I will need to pay the doctor like $150. I just asked ChatGPT.
Yeah,
there's one aspect I like, which is the improvement in bedside manner.
Yeah,
same as in the teaching domain. Some of the I have a friend who's in college at the moment, and some of those teachers are not that friendly. The way these models are being trained, they're considerably nicer and patient, infinitely patient.
Well, Doug, that one thing you referenced about where the ChatGPT or whatever model they were talking to on the medical advice, if I remember, the one I read said, when it came to talking to a lay person, the reason they liked it is because it gave more detail rather than, it's, you have a tumor, you're gonna die, or it's indigestion, get out of my office because 90% of the time it's tumor, boom. Versus, you know, going down and laying out logically, it's this because of this and this and this. It could be this, but I don't think it is because of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was the same.
Bedside manner.
Yep, the University of San Diego study, and it wasn't just accuracy; it was accuracy plus empathy.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And or I mean, another way to think about it is accuracy plus user experience or something. You know, it's everything comes down to customer experience sooner or later.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's. But it's, yeah, we're not going to disrupt doctors. They have a monopoly, that's for sure. And but you're going to get free assistance instead of going to Cleveland Clinic and Mayo, you'll go to ChatGPT and Cleveland Clinic.
Toby's comment kind of is interesting. I have thought that people are going to prefer to deal with people. That's just the way we are, right? So a lot of those customer-facing jobs would be safe. But it's an interesting point if actually ChatGPT is more friendly than people and we switch.
I think there are two aspects specifically in the context of doctors, right? I mean, especially these big groups, the smaller individual practices are not able to stand against the big groups, and the big groups have a kind of a rule that, well, you need to see these many patients in this much time, and this is how you need to bill. So they are on a lot of pressure to. So it's not just the bedside manners, it's like that pressure on top that they have to meet the goal or certain RVU, whatever way they measure the productivity, versus ChatGPT is, there's no such pressure. So definitely, that's a big factor in there.
I have a friend, a neighbor who's just a few houses away from me, and he's a doctor, but he's a young guy, let's say in his mid-30s or something like that, starting his practice. And he actually was the one that came up to me and said, hey, could I talk to you about, ChatGPT and things like that? Because he wants to build something so people can get advice from it. And then once they have that advice kind of get set in their mind, then come to him with that, I went up to your site, I saw, I have these symptomologies and it's possibly this, what do you think? But, just to get that first level being handled by a bot instead of by him having to deal with it and them having to come in to see him and things like that. So I thought that was kind of a interesting way for a doctor, if you think from their business model, and heads and beds or whatever you want to call that, an interesting way to do that. And it probably would actually provide some better service and give him some more interesting challenges versus, how many times have you, he's an orthopedic guy, how many times have you fixed something that could be, just by a series of stretching exercises fixed or something like that.
I have a question for Doug, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So, so these large language models, so are they, do they identify changing trends over time? Because do you have to continuously retrain this model? So does it mean that they will always be a step behind the trend?
Well, you could tune them very quickly. So you like in the medical field, you could every day you could feed in all the stuff coming out of the major journals. But yeah, that's one of the problems with with GPT-3. GPT-3 was trained on, I think it was 2021 data. Mm-hmm. So it was funny if you ask it what is an LLM, it would go on and on about this obscure legal law methodology or something like that, because the phrase didn't exist when it was trained, or the large language model phrase didn't exist when it was trained. But yeah, I mean, it's still very, very early times. I mean, these things have only been around 4 months or 5 months, but you could tune them forever. And just like we had with machine learning 40 years ago, people will be looking at when do you kill the model and train it just on the past 10 years, versus when do you train it on everything for the past 20 years and everything going forward. Right, because having a whole bunch of medical information about 20 years ago might not be quite as useful as having a bigger model about medical information, just the current situation. But all those methodologies, I haven't seen any good work on any of those methodologies. I'm sure it'll flush out quickly, because in law and in medical, and when I say law, I include taxes. A lot of the most Byzantine laws in our country are tax laws, and they absolutely change every year. You can't just rely on knowledge from 2021.
Some of that's already being addressed, though. Just what Jerry presented, Toolformer, where the large language models are using these other services, such as a retrieval system, a query system. Even if you go on Edge, that large language model will do an internet search on a topic and then summarize the results to you. So I feel like some of that current knowledge that's already been addressed.
There is that. And I wonder also, you mentioned that Bloomberg was a customer of yours. Obviously, they sort of make a living selling information, right? It happens to be financial, but similar type companies. Do you foresee a future when Bloomberg will have their own subscription only type thing that you have to pay a fairly substantial premium to get, or companies like Bloomberg?
Oh yeah. I think you'll see all these different service levels pretty quickly. Hopefully we learned something from the last 20 years, and this won't be advertiser-based revenue. I mean, it's you get halfway through the description, and then here's a text ad from PepsiCo or something. Yeah, I hope these are subscription. Like, I hope it goes the Netflix route, so we can, I want to pay for the premium one. I want to pay when they get good enough. I want to pay $50 a month. I don't want to just sit around and wait for ads.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all that, I think you'll see that really quickly on everything. Salesforce is going to have, a chatbot option. Google Docs is going to have a chatbot option. And maybe it's $2 extra. I don't know what the business model is going to be, but yeah, AWS thinks that within 10 years, every app will have an LLM, just like every app has a GUI.
Interesting.
I'm surprised they think that this era will last that long before it's transformed into something else.
Yeah.
I think they were sandbagging. I think they were trying to say, don't worry, Microsoft, you have time.
Yeah. Is this like
I noticed in the Google I/O announcement about not the model they're using for Bard at the moment, Palm 2, but the next model that they're going to do, that they were training for memory and tool use. And so I think memory might be part of the answer, as Roger said, I mean, they will almost certainly have models they can afford to update in a batchy fashion pretty much continuously.
Right.
But memory might be another way of like patching over like what happened on Twitter in the last 6 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And then since they own Chrome, I mean, there's just so many ways to distribute the work and train from what I do, let alone training from public stuff. They see everything I write, that's for sure.
Hey, Doug, I have one question related to the real-time like model tunings. Do you guys like handle the situations where you need to tune the models or train the models with the real-time data instead of taking the batch data and run it for like 1-2 days and generating the models?
No, the only applications I've seen is doing that in the prompts. So few shot in the prompts. And we've been surprised how few examples you need in the prompt to get good results. But again, the inference cost goes way up. So if you're doing it for emails, like email messages, then 10, 12 examples in the prompt works well. If you're doing it with 50, 60 page contracts, it starts to get pretty expensive pretty fast. Including 24 60-page contracts in the prompts. It's really expensive, and it's not real time. That's going to take a long time to respond, even on the big farms that we're using on AWS and Databricks.
So I'm assuming, Doug, that's GPT-4 way costlier than GPT 3.5, right? I mean, of course, the cost can be high for us scoring and inferencing with prompts even for GPT 3.5, but 4 is, I think, an order or so more.
Yeah, it's definitely, we've seen a lot of applications where what we wanted to try was just too expensive on GPT-4. So we went to Bloom or GPT-J, one of the open sources, and put it on our own GPUs. But yeah, there's a lot of examples where the inference, I mean, we spent 50 years, a lot of data science, you spend all the time on the modeling, and the inference is almost instantaneous. Even with XGBoost, not anymore. You can get like 3 minutes to infer some of these legal examples, and that's not interactive. Three minutes is there's like a human threshold. Anything over 15 seconds is batch.
Okay.
Do you see? Can I ask, Jenny?
Let's Dev, maybe your question, and if we have one more, and then we'll let Doug go and finish for the evening, because we're coming close to time here.
Thank you. So this was a follow-up on the previous question. So with that, do you see people asking for fine-tuning for GPT-4, and is OpenAI logged in for the few prompts solution, or like in the past they allowed fine-tuning of the GPT-2 or so models? Are they open to letting people fine-tune and pay the cost and use it?
I mean, we work with most of the big pharmaceutical companies in the world and most of the big banks. And as you know, these guys have big checkbooks. We got a lot of customers running private GPT-4 instances. So they're not running into the Samsung problem of multi-tenant GPT-4. I mean, it's going to flesh out there. I mean, that's why I was actually excited that Microsoft jumped in and wanted to be a distribution partners. I think they're going to have to come up with 100 different products and just let people pick. It's not going to be one size fits all. But a lot of our big customers, the Fortune or the Global 100, they want everything to be SaaS now. They don't even want to download Bloom and use Bloom. They want it all to be API, and whether Netezza does it or they don't care what's on the other end of the REST API, but they just want it to be all software as a service. And so private instances of GPT-4 and just pay by the month or pay by the usage. They don't care. I mean, we have customers that are paying Snowflake 10 million a year or 20 million a year. So and they're paying Azure twice that. So if OpenAI can prove its value, they'd be happy to spend millions and millions. I mean, think about these lawyers, right? You're testing middle of the night, you got 4 hours to test for a trial you're going into the next afternoon. You can't have a senior partner in there because the senior partner is not going to stay up until 3 in the morning. And the senior partner's, $1,100 an hour. And ChatGPT-4 is a frickin' bargain. I mean, it's a private version of ChatGPT-4 is a real bargain. but they got to solve the multi-tenant stuff. They have to solve the privacy stuff. They have to solve the much bigger prompts. But on a private version, if you have a private version, it should be easy to have much bigger prompts.
Right. Okay, why don't we go ahead and Doug, thank you very much. I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody. This has really been eye-opening. We really appreciate your time and everything on that.